There are at least 12 different note variations to be found in Silent Hill 2's version of Brookhaven Hospital. Many of them are written ambiguously, with broken words and half-formed sentences. What do they mean, and who wrote them? To find out, let's walk through these notes and connect them all to the larger context of Silent Hill 2. When the player first enters the hospital, they come across a room that leads to a save point and 2 different notes. The first is a set of medical records for 3 patients: Joseph, Joshua, and Jack. It describes the symptoms and behaviors of each, everything from paranoid delusions to violence to suicidal tendencies. The second paper is a letter written by a doctor who works in the hospital, who is never named. It describes an illness which the doctor relates to being on the other side, a concept closely related to the other world of Silent Hill. The note itself is implied to be written about Joseph, a patient who is convinced he's guilty of the death of his daughter. The notes found throughout the level aren't signed or given context, but when examined as a whole, there are clues that can connect these notes to the 4 characters named above. To determine who wrote a note, it's important to examine the patterns in each one, how it's written, punctuated, and spelled. There are a number of notes which have no punctuation or capitalization at all. They're written as manic run-on sentences, often with misspellings. These notes, based on content and placement, were written by Joseph. The first is the imprint on the carbon paper in one of the doctor's offices. The room is a mess. The piece of paper Joseph wrote on is gone. Only the carbon imprint on the typewriter is left. It's likely the doctor's destroyed his note. The room gives an appearance of having suffered an attack, as if Joseph perhaps was found using the typewriter, was forcibly apprehended and taken away. There's 2 possible versions of the message on the paper. In easy mode, the note gives the player the number code to one of the locks on the Louise box. Joseph writes that the button key doesn't scare him anymore, and that nobody can stop him. The content falls apart as he endlessly repeats variations of who I am. Nobody can stop who I am. I don't know who I am. Who I am is who I am. Depending on how it's read, it can mean a dozen things, and without punctuation, the true meaning is left to interpretation. The button key he's not afraid of is the lock this note has the code for, the push-button lock on the Louise box. The hard version of this calls the code the secret, and the hospital a demon shelter. It also discusses a he. It says he will be free and no one can stop me, before degrading into cries of stop, no, no, reinforcing the idea that Joseph was dragged from the room. Other notes Joseph wrote include the note on the wall next to the box in blood. Louise, I will take care of you forever. It's my destiny. A note that has a misspelling and seems to reinforce his delusion that his daughter is alive and inside the box. What's really inside is a piece of hair, likely hers, the last remaining piece of her Joseph has. In the doctor's office at the typewriter, Joseph seems to have a realization. He writes down the code to unlock the box because he is no longer afraid and no one can stop him. But he still doesn't know who he is, because he has not opened the box and learned the truth yet. The last note written by him is another bloody note in the padded room. So much blood coats the walls, it's unlikely he survived. On the outside is another note that reads, if Joseph looks calm, he can be taken out of his cell. Clearly, Joseph was the one locked in this room, where he wrote a note about the other code to open the box. He writes, turn the numbers, and write them here, and mysteriously ends with the other one, my secret name. Joseph came to the hospital as a patient after suffering a breakdown after his daughter's death. He blamed himself for her loss, and unable to face losing her, fell into a delusional world in which she lived and was protected by him in this box. The doctor writes about this, that he is in a happy unreality and wonders if it's really right to drag him into the sad reality for the sake of medical treatment. At some point in this treatment, Joseph comes to a realization. This realization has something to do with the box, and with a mysterious him that the writer is no longer afraid of, for whom the box will be useless. So he starts writing the codes on the typewriter. But he's dragged away to the padded cell. You could see scuffs on the floor leading to the bloody room, where he writes the last code in his own blood, before likely dying either from self-inflicted harm or from harm done to him by the staff, or both. There are multiple clues that lead to the idea that Joseph was killed by members of the staff. His own riddles refer to the hospital as a demon shelter, a place that houses evil. Another note in Silent Hill 3 will imply a similar fate for people inside the padded cells, that the staff were intentionally harming patients. Joseph matters because he is a mirror image of our protagonist, of James. All the events of the hospital reflect James's own journey. Joseph represses a terrible truth about the death of a family member, is forced to remember, which inevitably kills him. James enters the hospital looking for a little girl named Laura. Joseph is focused upon a little girl named Louise. The other patients and the doctor represent people James encounters in the game. Angela is the suicidal patient, Jack, and Eddie is the violent patient, Joshua. Both of these patients also likely wrote notes found in the hospital. There's a diary on the roof which focuses heavily on suicidal ideation and depression, which likely means it was Jack. It describes the character as someone who feels worthless, and who mentions having a family to feed. It ends with the character abruptly stopping in the middle of a sentence, possibly because he jumped. These notes are far more coherent than Joseph's. There's proper sentence structure, punctuation, and spelling. Only one other note resembles this one, and it's the basement note, in which a character describes being locked up inside the basement's basement, where he dropped a precious ring. The connection is interesting, since it has the character going from the deepest prison to the highest part of the hospital. The ring, a symbol of marriage in another part of the level, is also mentioned, and the diary mentions a family as well. The note is found next to a painting of hands grasping in the darkness, a symbol of the pain suffered by the patients here. Jack's story seems to be that of a person trying to escape a bad family situation, which may end with the character committing suicide, an almost mirror image of Angela. The last character, Joshua, seems to have written one note. There's a note that describes how a character took the director's key, that he did not steal it and he's not a criminal. It's written in sentences but with multiple misspellings, differentiating it from the other writers. What makes it sound like Joshua is the persecution complex, where he insists he didn't steal the key, though clearly he must have. The key belonged to the director, and he is an important player in this level too, because he is most likely the doctor that writes the notes in this level. The last note from the doctor is found in the director's office, and he mentions that he saw Joshua take the key, implying he was nearby when it was stolen, meaning it may have been his. This means he wrote the first letter about Joseph and the other world, the note on the map telling James about the letter and wrench, and the letter later found at the house. The director has an interesting arc in this level. The first letter he writes is a journal, something he wrote for his own record. The bottom has a note written by hand. I got the key from Joseph. It's probably the key to that box. The way he writes this, and given the events of the level, lead me to believe he got the key after Joseph passed away. Otherwise, he might use more forceful words like took the key. Got implies there was nothing standing in his way. It's likely the director was treating Joseph personally, since he discusses this patient so much and seems personally involved. The tone of his writing changes by the time James gets to the map. The first note in Brookhaven he reads is the director's, and the last is also a note from the director, giving him instructions as to how to move forward. This is a note specifically written for the reader. It doesn't say it was for James, but it clearly implies to the player these directions are for them. It references a famous quote by philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. "If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." The message follows a line discussing fighting with monsters. It's about the dangers of becoming exactly that which you are supposed to be against. In the case of the Doctor, it reflects the idea that in treating people who are dealing with these illnesses, that he might start seeing the other side too. But the quote in the letter isn't exact. It's a reimagining of Nietzsche's quote. He who is not bold enough to be stared at from across the abyss is not bold enough to stare into it himself. This isn't a warning against the abyss. It's about having the fortitude to face it without flinching. The meaning is completely changed. Instead of dealing with the fear of becoming the monster you're fighting, it includes a new angle of being stared at from across the abyss. Who is staring at James? And what is the abyss he must be bold enough to stare into? While in the hospital, there's a portion where James is forced forward by Pyramid Head following him onto the roof. It leads him into the padded cell that has the key he needs to move forward, leading him further on his journey. Later in the historical society, he will make many similar, dangerous jumps, but he won't have to be forced. He'll jump of his own free will. He will face the abyss. Pyramid Head is the one staring at him from across the abyss, daring him to jump. The abyss is Silent Hill. In the next director letter, left next to the wrench, he mentions that part of that abyss is in the old society, implying that the darkness of Silent Hill is in fact the abyss. The note tells us a little more about the Doctor. It says he also saw that thing. Pyramid Head is also referred to in canon as Red Pyramid Thing, which is likely the monster the director is speaking of. What's more interesting is that he tells James he also saw him, as if he knows that James saw Pyramid Head. Then he mentions James by name. Here, after leaving Brookhaven and escaping through the whole level, we find out we were being watched. How does the director know James's name? And how did he know James saw Pyramid Head? How did he know where James needed to go? The director is one of the most fascinating characters in the background of Silent Hill 2 because his existence and his knowledge invite so many questions. He starts concerned with Joseph, a character who is nearly identical to James in mental state and situation. He questions the idea of an other side and what it is that Joseph sees. But later, it's clear he can see it too. He sees the thing. He fears the key because he can sense something is wrong with it. And he mentions that he wasn't looking for the truth, but for tranquility. He has stared into the abyss and become the monster by slipping into the other side that he was trying to pull Joseph out of. The director is someone the town seems to have used to allow James to make it through, someone that guides James on his journey, just as he tried to guide Joseph to the truth, but failed. This may be his penance to Silent Hill, for his inability to save Joseph's life. There's only a few notes that specifically name James. Most of them are written by Mary. One is a gravestone in the prison, and one is a note in the hotel. But one mysteriously appears only after James has gone through Brookhaven Hospital and presumably read all the letters from the Doctor. It's written in full sentences and implies knowledge of James's situation, using his name, just like the Doctor's notes. But it is written in blood with a messy scrawl, implying a descent into madness. Given when this note is found, so soon after the other notes from the Doctor, and the fact that it too mentions James by name, leads me to believe that the note on the wall in Bar Neely's was written by the hospital director. This man, whose face can be seen in a portrait in the Historical Society, and whose name can be read on his desk in Brookhaven, Lawrence Monterey.